readers are really... Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing really well. My name is Hannah and I'm an author from the southeast of England. I mostly make videos on writing, some handy tips videos and on booktube. So if that sounds like something that is your cup of tea, please do consider subscribing to my channel. I've been thinking about doing a video on research for creative writing for a long time. I think where it's such a big topic, I found it quite intimidating. There's a lot that you can miss. It's honestly huge. So this video is kind of like my introduction, I guess, to research and how I feel about it and how I approach it. I'm hoping to do more videos down the line on more detailed issues and topics. So yeah, this one's just kind of an introduction, I suppose. So the main things I want to look at in this video are, one, whether or not we actually need to research and maybe why we need to research for our novels, and then two, tips that I have picked up along the way to help me with my research for my novel. As a quick side note before we jump in, my actual job, aside from writing, is a researcher. So I research and develop products for a travel company. So I'm quite used to researching, but I mean, that doesn't really make me an expert in it, especially not for creative writing. It's quite a different ballgame. So these are just things that I've picked up on the way, things that I've learned that I find useful, and I hope you find them useful too. The question that I hear quite a lot, especially when I discuss researching, which is a lot of the time because I really like it, is do I really need to worry about researching for my novel? In my opinion, the short answer is probably yes. The amount of research and what kind of research you want to do will depend on what sort of novel you're writing, who you're writing it for, your background. There's loads of stuff that feeds into it, but the short answer is probably yes. For me, I write thrillers and I'm just kind of leaning into horror now. So there's quite a lot of research that I do. For Number 47, my first novel, I did quite minimal research. So I kind of did research to fill in the gaps where I needed to, but I didn't do a huge amount. However, for One Road In, which is my current work in progress, I've done more research than I've ever done before for creative writing. I personally think it's really important to research when you're writing a novel. Even if you only do a little bit here and there, I think it really lends to the voice that you're creating and the authority that maybe you want with specific things. If you're kind of saying a fact or a thing in your novel as if it is a fact, then you probably want to make sure that it is a fact. Readers are really quite good at picking up on things that might not be quite true. I don't personally write military, but I can imagine that that is definitely one area where readers are really into that topic. So if you maybe write something incorrectly, so maybe you talk about the wrong kind of gun or bullet or something, I'm pretty sure those readers are going to come down on you. So for that kind of thing, I think it's really important. I also think it's really important to do research to help with your creativity. I think research is a great way to get out of a writing rut. I think it's really good to use research to help if you've hit a bit of a block or a wall, because sometimes you'll read a little nugget or a little fact that will just kind of spark that creativity in you again and will lead to loads more writing. For creative writing, I think research falls into 5 categories. The first category is character research. So that can be anything from aesthetics to biological research to maybe psychological research, so the way people might react to certain things, and also, I suppose, medical research, so how the body would react if it was injured in a certain way. The second category is settings or geographical research. Pretty self-explanatory. You're researching the landscape or the setting that you've put your novel in. I find geographical research some of the most interesting. You end up researching kind of plants, trees, and going down rabbit holes, almost literally. Google Maps is great for this. Another really good one for geographical research is researching the distance between 2 points. So if you've got a journey in your novel, you might have to know how far apart they are. It obviously sits in this category. The third category is scientific research. So is something actually possible? Is it scientifically possible? Especially if you're writing sci-fi, this is probably the one you'll be in most of the time. The fourth category is procedural research. So anything from police procedure to legal procedure. I guess everyone's favourite Googled question, how do I get rid of a body, would sit quite nicely in this one. The fifth category is era research. So if you're setting your novel in a different era, obviously you're going to have to do quite a bit of research, unless you lived through that era, to be able to make sure that your novel feels authentic and true to when you're setting it. For me personally, my current Whip One Road Inn is set in the 80s and 90s. I was not there for the 80s and I was about 9 for the late 90s. So yeah, I've had to do quite a bit of research on these areas to make sure that what I'm writing is right. So as I mentioned earlier, research is massive. It's very, very easy to end up down a rabbit hole and research really weird things that have absolutely no relevance and probably won't help you with your novel. So I've tried to come up with some top tips to help with researching for your novel. These are tips that I personally find really helpful and I do use every single time I research. The first tip is maybe the most important one and probably the one I really ought to follow more myself, is to start your research with a goal. It is so easy to end up going down a complete side road or a rabbit hole when researching. I literally did it the other day, started researching life in the 80s, what it would be like to go on holiday in the 80s, and before I know it, I'm researching and finding out when the pedalo was invented. Is that relevant to my story? No. Did I want to find it out anyway? Yes. It was invented in 1986, by the way. I can't remember the guy that made it though. To stop yourself or maybe catch yourself when you're falling down a bit of a rabbit hole, I think goals are really important. Or maybe set yourself a time limit. Say I'm going to do 30 minutes researching this particular thing, and then kind of catch up with yourself afterwards and make sure you've got what you need. The second tip is to use a variety of sources. I think it's really important to remember that you don't need to find out everything from online articles. We don't have to read everything. There are videos, there are talks, there's so much stuff online, podcasts, loads of stuff that I think are just as good as articles. You can also really think outside the box on this one, so you don't need to rely on articles or videos or podcasts. Really just push the limits. So if you're trying to create a setting, or if you're researching a particular setting, something I do is use Google Maps all the time. So I just drop the little orange man in the middle of the town I'm writing about, and then you're there. There are also loads of websites that can help with researching. One of my favourite ones, I used this when I was researching growing up in the noughties. So though I was obviously there and was very much growing up in the noughties, I wanted to see some old websites from the really early 2000s. So you can use something called the Wayback Machine. Drop in the current company or website URL, and then you can change the date. So you can look at a website that is live today, but see what it would have looked like in 2003. This will give you a really, really good idea of what the internet looked like back then. My third tip is, if you can, interview people. I've only very recently done this for creative writing purposes, and it has honestly changed the face of my Whip. So a couple of weeks ago, I had a telephone call with a missing persons coordinator from up in Wales. He had so much information, I just can't. He had way more to offer than I would ever have found out just by reading articles online. And actually his information is what has caused me to completely change the face of my Whip and move it from being set in the current day to being set in the late 80s and early 90s. If you can interview people or just talk to people that are on the front line of what it is you're writing about, it's honestly invaluable. My fourth tip is to check your sources. This isn't always that important depending on what it is you're researching, but if you are researching something really, really crucial to your plot line, then I would definitely check your sources to make sure it's right. Again, if you're writing something maybe medical or military, and you absolutely need it to be watertight, I would definitely check your sources. Tip number 5 is keep in mind that you definitely don't have to use everything you've learned through researching. I think realistically the amount of research I have done for my current novel, maybe a quarter of that will be physically referenced in my novel. Actually, in a lot of respects, you probably shouldn't use everything that you've learned, or else you're at risk of definitely having a massive info dump. Right, that's it. Those are my top 5 tips on how to get the most out of your research for your novel. As mentioned earlier on in the video, I definitely want to do more videos on research. I couldn't really find that many on YouTube, so I am well up for doing some more if people find them interesting and useful. One that I'm going to do for a couple of weeks' time actually is to go through the process of how to interview someone on the front line. So Mentioned earlier, I interviewed someone a couple of weeks back who is a missing persons coordinator, and I'm going to do a video on how I got in touch with him, what kind of questions I asked, and kind of the follow-up and what you gain from that process. I know it definitely sounds sad, but I actually really enjoy researching. I love learning new stuff, so if anyone ever has any questions on research or wants any more tips, please drop some questions in the comments. If you did enjoy the video, please do give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel. I'll be back next week with another video. Thanks, bye!